How much money does your company lose due to employee attrition every year? Would you be surprised if it was in the tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of dollars? Well, it's quite possible. I'm David West, and I'm going to be discussing the application of analytics to this human resources problem to help your organization save millions in the coming years. We'll discuss the human resources challenge. We'll talk a little bit about IBM analytics, and more importantly, we'll talk about applying analytics to the human resources challenge to enable you to identify those employees who are most likely to leave your organization so that you can take steps to retain the most valuable employees. And then we'll demonstrate how that's done. So where do the costs associated with employee attrition come from? Well, if you suddenly lose someone who's gone over the competition, you have a disruption of business. All that money that was spent training that employee is for naught. You have the cost of recruiting their replacement. That can include costs of advertising, paying hiring bonuses, paying referral bonuses, and then of course the costs associated with onboarding that employee, such as administrating their benefits package, training them, the lost productivity associated with training a new employee. They're not going to be up to full steam for at least 2 to 4 months. And you always have the chance that the person that you hire is not a good fit. You have a bad hire. And in the case of managers leaving, in many cases, you have the risk that that manager will take other employees with him or her to the new company. Since I've mentioned management, according to research conducted by UC Berkeley, turnover in management can cost the organization as much as 150% of that manager's annual salary. So these can be very significant costs. Now, is this the top challenge for HR? No, but there are many challenges facing HR, and this can address some significant challenges. As you can see from the results of this survey conducted by the Society for Human Resource Management in 2015, retaining the high-performing employees and retaining employees overall is on the forefront of HR executives' minds, in at least 1 out of 4 cases. So what other challenges do HR professionals face? Well, you're always expected to do more with less. Budgets get cut, money is tight, and human resources departments are asked to become strategic partners within the organization, but we don't want to pay more for that. Unexpected attrition makes it difficult, if not impossible, to plan and maintain effective hiring strategies. If you suddenly are faced with the need to replace 5 people in one office, are you capable of meeting that need, or do you risk getting poor performing employees on board because you're rushing to get the job done? If you had the information necessary to predict where your attrition was going to be highest, you could staff accordingly, and you could take steps to start your advertising process in advance. Now, in a competitive market, competition for the best employees increases the chance that they're going to leave. Limited budgets for salary increases and bonuses require that we make more effective use of money as a motivator. Now, as anybody who's ever studied operant conditioning can tell you, a reward that is consistently provided for the same behavior eventually loses effectiveness. In psychological parlance, we call it habituation. The response to that stimulus is habituated. And bonuses and salary are no stranger to that effect. So you have to become more strategic in your application of salary and bonus as a mechanism for retaining employees. It's not always the best strategy. Improper use of bonuses, such as over-rewarding undesirable behavior, can be a demotivator. And let's face it, people do talk. They do share information about their bonuses, whether they're not supposed to or not. And if a bonus was given to someone who doesn't work as hard as other people on the team, that can demotivate the rest of the team who didn't get the same bonus. Now, predicting employee behavior is crucial to solving these problems. But the ability to predict employee behavior requires skills that aren't always within the HR department. But the good news is these skills can be developed within HR, and they can be taught. So what do we need to address the challenge? Well, we need a solution that is easy to use. Now, everybody's going to say their solution is easy to use. I can back that up. The solution has to be able to use data wherever it resides. It has to produce results that we can understand and that we can act on. And the information, above all, must be accurate. Whether we're forecasting attrition rates or we're predicting which employees are going to leave, we have to be accurate with that information in order for it to be relied on in the future. Now, all organizations are going through change these days. One of the big changes is migration from on-premises data storage to cloud-based applications and cloud-based data storage. So the solution has to be flexible enough to adapt with us should we go down that road. So if our data is in a database today, maybe tomorrow it's in the cloud. We have to be able, or the solution has to be able to adapt to that. And of course, it has to be something that we can afford. So it has to be budget friendly, and it's got to have a great ROI. But how does this whole thing work? How complex is it? Well, it's a very simple process. It begins with an HR analyst gathering data that describes the demographics of each individual, their salary, their work location, how far do they commute to and from work, what are their hours, who's their boss, how long has their boss held their position, how long has the employee held their position. Basically anything that you can gather that describes that employee. You look at it from a historical perspective, and then you look at who left at what point in time. That is fed into the system, and the system then builds a predictive model that identifies employees who are most likely to leave. And because this prediction is based on your own data, not some model built that describes the whole generic industry, it's a more accurate model and something that you can work with, something that you can trust. Using the results of that model, management acts proactively to take steps to retain the most desirable employees. So your top performers. You know, if it's an employee who's likely to leave, but they've gotten bad performance reviews in their last 3 reviews, yeah, maybe you just stand on the street corner and wave goodbye and wish them good luck instead of trying to retain them. The end result of all this, the end result of applying analytics to human resources, is the company grows and the company prospers. So why should you act now? Well, the solution makes it easy for beginners to quickly create accurate models and produce actionable insight. The financial benefit is really where it's at. If you look at industry averages for the United States for all job levels, all jobs, across the board, the average cost to replace an employee is somewhere around $10,000. Now, I've talked to some clients who said for them they had calculated it at $12,000. So there's going to be some variation according to the type of job, the location of the job, and whatnot. The average monthly quit rate, that's the voluntary separation rate, people that just quit their jobs, excluding people that get fired or retire. The monthly quit rate is around 3% for all job levels. I've had some customers who were in the customer service business. They provide call centers for all sorts of organizations. Their quit rate was 13% per month. Others, if you've got a very good company that likes to retain its employees, it may be lower. But across the board, the average is 3%. Now let's say your company has 5,000 employees. You do the math, the cost of attrition is $18 million a year. If you're larger, it's obviously going to be more. If you are able to reduce attrition by only 10%, which is an extremely realistic goal, you're going to save $1.8 million a year. The solution costs a small fraction of that. So it makes good sense to act on this. So I'm going to demonstrate how this is done. The demo is going to access some historical data that describes a fictitious company's employees, and it will look at the retention patterns across the entire organization. We're going to start out by looking at data through a Cognos dashboard to view the impact of attrition on different parts of the organization. And then we'll see how predictive analytics are driving that dashboard. We're going to pull data from a couple of different tables. We're going to sample the data, and then we're going to build a predictive model automatically. And it will identify which employees are likely to leave. So those results will then be pushed directly into Cognos, all automatic. So let's start with our dashboard. We're looking at the high-level view of the entire organization. We've got some bar charts that describe our head count, that aggregate our retention risk across each job function, that look at the cost, the projected cost of attrition to the entire company, and break that out by each division. So let's start. We can see that across the board, for the entire data set, the average risk of attrition is about 0.31. That costs us about $6 million a year. That's what it's expected to cost. But as we can see over here, we've got both active and terminated people in our database. So let's factor those out and only look at the people that are active. We've already lost some people along the way is the point here. So for all active employees, our average attrition propensity is about 0.13. We can see that females are slightly higher than males. We can see where the head count is, again, by department, and we can see which departments have the highest risk of losing people. So support, finance, HR are all right there at the top. But looking at the cost allocation, it looks like sales is going to cost us $1.8 million. So let's go into sales. As we go into sales, we now see that we only have 3 departments represented, the largest one being the Eastern Division. We see our retention risk is 0.165, and the projected cost is almost $2 million. We also see that females have a higher propensity towards attrition than males. So let's look at the females. The one thing that strikes me right off the bat is the projected cost is only $134,000. Well, that's because headcount for females within this division is much less than headcount for males. So let's take a look at the males. Well, if we look at males, now we see that there's about a 9-to-1 ratio of males to females in that department. And the propensity to leave for males is still relatively high at 0.16, and the projected annual attrition cost is $1.75 million. So we're going to want to take a look at who these people are that are likely to leave. And we have a nice little list that pops up and tells us which employee we can modify the report to put people's names and change the structure, change the nature of the information that's on here. But we're looking at the people that are most likely to leave. So the model is predicting that they will terminate. We see the propensity or the probability that they're going to leave, so it's all very high. But we're only looking at people who either got a meets and exceeds on their performance rating or an exceeds. So these are our best employees. We see where they are. We see what the cost to replace in that specific position is. We have an actionable list. We can use this information to alert managers that you have employees who are likely to leave. We'd like you to retain them. We can use this to drive retention programs such as retention bonus programs. There are many different actions that can be taken. Sometimes just alerting managers to potential problems can help reduce the problem. Other times, a high risk retention risk may be the result of a manager who's in need of some additional training. Maybe their soft skills aren't quite what they should be. All of this can be driven by analytics. So where did this model come from? We're going to go into our predictive analytics software, and what we're seeing now is a completed model. This is the system that we use to build a predictive model. What you might notice here is this is the report we were just looking at. Well, how do we get that over to Cognos? It's pretty simple. We just attach a Cognos BI node to it, and this whole stream can run automatically. So let's go ahead and get it started. I'm going to click Run, and when it starts running, it's going to ask me what it is I want to predict. So I want to predict the status of the employee. Will they stay or will they go? It will pull data from the two data sources. It's going to automatically sample that data, join tables together, instantiate the metadata, give us some diagnostic information about the data. It will go through some modeling best practices and then build a predictive model that will identify which employees are likely to leave. We'll then capture that model, apply it to our full data, and create the list that we've just looked at. So let's do that. So as you can see, it's laying out the nodes that will be used throughout this process, step by step. And now it's going to build the things. So we're going to sample our HR data. We're going to join it with some data that describes the cost to replace. But first, let's take a look at the distribution of our target. So status is our target. We see that about 27% of our people are terminated. And we'd like to have about a 50-50 distribution that will balance the data so that the model can be built more effectively. We also would like to take a look at the quality of the data, and using our data audit node, we can see how all of our fields are distributed. We can see what our continuous fields or our numeric fields, how they're distributed, and we can make an informed decision as to whether or not those fields need to be normalized. We also create a holdout data set as a best practice. So a holdout data set is a partition. We divide the data into two different partitions. We build the model with one partition and we test it against the other. And as I mentioned before, we'd like a 50-50 distribution, so we're balancing the data, oversampling the underrepresented aspects. What we're looking at now is an analysis of the model itself. And here we see that the model was 92% accurate against our testing data. That's not a bad model. 93% accurate against our training. So that's pretty remarkable for an initial stab at the data. Now let's apply that model to our full data set, so to all of our employees. So again, we're going through the same steps, joining the tables together, selecting out just those who are high performers, applying the model, sorting the data, and only selecting those who are most likely to quit. And then that information is what gets passed on to our dashboard so that we can act on the information. And there's our high-risk report. We see it sorted based on the propensity to leave. All of these people are most likely to leave organization. We can act on this information now. So just to recap, the cost of employee attrition can be in the millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, depending upon the organization's size. There's tremendous risk associated with losing highly trained, highly valued employees. We've demonstrated a way to predict which employees are most likely to leave the organization and to provide actionable information that can be used by HR professionals and managers to help reduce the impact of attrition on the organization. I'm David West. I'll be happy to entertain any questions you might have. Thank you very much for your time.